Buried, a story of loss, accumulation, and the grace that cleared the way. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. From the outside, the house on Delwood Avenue looked like a house that needed attention. Gutters pulling away from the roof line, curtains permanently drawn, a front porch stacked with boxes that had been there so long the cardboard had fused with the weather, a driveway where a car had not been parked in 3 years because the garage was not accessible, and the driveway itself was lined with items covered in blue tarps that the neighbors had stopped asking about. From the outside, it looked like neglect. From the inside, it was something more complicated than that. From the inside, it was 47 years of a woman trying to hold on to everything because she had lost so much. A woman who had discovered, somewhere in the long accumulation of her pain, that things did not leave. Things did not walk out. Things did not disappear in the night, or go cold or look at her with eyes that had stopped seeing her. Things stayed, so she kept things, all of them. Her name is Dot Wynn. Everyone who loves her, and there are fewer of those than there used to be for reasons that this story will explain, calls her Dot. This is not a story about a house full of things. This is a story about what was underneath all of it, and the day it finally came to light. Before we move forward with the story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help us to grow this channel to uplift more people. To understand the house on Delwood Avenue, you have to understand Dot Wynn before it. Before the boxes and the blue tarps. Before the $94,000 in credit card debt spread across 11 accounts. Before the garage that hadn't been opened in 4 years and the kitchen table that hadn't been used for eating in 2. Before all of it, there was a woman. Dorothea May Wynn was born in Macon, Georgia, the only child of Reverend Leonard Wynn and his wife Constance, a household built on order and expectation and the specific quiet pressure of being the daughter of a man the community revered. Her father was not cruel. He was not unkind. He was, however, a man whose love was primarily expressed through approval, and whose approval was contingent on performance, and who had, without intending to, raised a daughter who understood love as something you earned rather than something you simply had. She was a good student. She was quiet in the way that children are quiet when they are constantly monitoring the temperature of the room. She was helpful and responsible, and she learned early that the safest way to move through her father's house was to be invisible and excellent simultaneously, to do everything right and take up as little space as possible while doing it. She left Macon at 18 for a nursing program in Atlanta, which was the first time in her life she had made a decision purely for herself. And the freedom of it was so large and so unfamiliar that she didn't quite know how to inhabit it. She met her first husband, Gregory, at 22. He was charming and certain of himself in a way she found magnetic, the confidence she had never been allowed to develop presented in another person, close enough to borrow. They married at 24. The marriage lasted 6 years. She does not talk about why it ended in specific terms. What she will say, to the people she trusts enough to say it to, is that she spent 6 years making herself smaller and smaller, trying to be what Gregory needed her to be. And by the time it was over, she had misplaced herself so thoroughly that she wasn't sure there was a self left to find. She moved into the house on Delwood Avenue at 30. A fresh start, she told herself. Her house, her space, room to rebuild. She did not know that rebuilding would require tools she had never been given. The losses did not come all at once. They came the way water damages a structure, incrementally, in places you can't always see, until one day you press on something that used to be solid and find that it has no resistance left. Her father passed when Dot was 32. The grief was complicated, not the clean grief of losing someone you had a simple relationship with, but the tangled kind, the kind that includes sorrow and unfinished business in equal measure. She had never received from her father the thing she had been performing her whole childhood to earn, and now the window was permanently closed, and she grieved both the man and the possibility simultaneously. 6 months after the funeral, her mother, Constance, was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition that would require increasing levels of care over the following 8 years. Dot, as the only child, became the primary caregiver, managing her mother's appointments, her finances, her medications, her gradual loss of independence, while working 12-hour shifts as a registered nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital. She was pouring herself out from a vessel that had never been fully filled. It was during this season that the buying started. Not dramatically, not all at once. A candle from a boutique on her lunch break, a sweater she didn't need in a color she loved, a set of kitchen items for the kitchen she was too exhausted to cook in. Small things, affordable things, the brief, reliable warmth of a purchase. The transaction, the bag, the unwrapping, producing a few minutes of something that felt, in the absence of other sources, like comfort. The things began to accumulate. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she would organize when she had more time. She told herself the boxes in the second bedroom were not a problem. They were just not yet sorted. She told herself a lot of things. Her mother passed when Dot was 40. 8 years of caregiving, and then the particular silence of a house that no longer needed you in the specific way it had needed you for 8 years. She took bereavement leave. She sat in the house on Delwood Avenue, surrounded by the things she had accumulated, and for the first time, she looked at them and felt not comfort but company. The house was full of things, and she was not alone in it, technically, in the way that a room with furniture is not empty. She was, in every way that mattered, completely alone. The buying accelerated. Online shopping arrived in her life with the particular cruelty of the perfectly timed bad thing. A limitless storefront open at 3 a.m. when the grief was loudest, delivering the transaction dopamine without requiring her to leave the house or interact with another person, or manage the specific difficulty of being visibly not okay in public. She bought things she needed. She bought things she didn't need. She bought multiples of things she already had, because the accumulation itself had become the point, the sense of having, of not losing, of things arriving rather than departing. The credit cards multiplied with the purchases. 3 cards became 5, became 8, became 11. She made minimum payments and told herself she was managing. She was a nurse. She understood the physiology of things. She knew that minimum payments on high balances were the financial equivalent of treating a hemorrhage with a bandage. But knowing the mechanics of a crisis and being able to stop it are different skills. By 47, Dot Wynn owed $94,000 across 11 accounts. By 47, the house on Delwood Avenue was navigable through 2 narrow pathways, one from the front door to the kitchen, one from the kitchen to the bedroom, and she had not had a visitor inside in 2 years. By 47, she was using the overtime shifts at the hospital, not just to manage the debt, but to stay away from the house, because the house had become a thing she lived inside without being able to look at, the way you live inside a body you've stopped recognizing. And then her supervisor at Grady Memorial, called her into the office and told her, with the careful professionalism of someone delivering unavoidable news, that several colleagues had raised concerns, not about her nursing, which remained excellent, but about her well-being. That the Employee Assistance Program had resources, that there were people who could help, and Dot Wynn, who had been holding herself together with nursing shifts and 3 a.m. purchases for 7 years, sat in her supervisor's office and felt the last of the holding give way. She did not call the Employee Assistance Program. She sat in the parking garage of Grady Memorial for 40 minutes after the meeting, and then she called the one person she had not called in 3 years, her college roommate, Nadine. Nadine Prescott lived 12 minutes away and worked as a social worker, and had, over the years, been the person Dot kept meaning to reconnect with, while simultaneously avoiding because reconnecting meant being seen, and being seen meant someone knowing how far the distance was between the woman Nadine remembered and the woman Dot had become. The phone rang 3 times. Nadine answered. Dot said, "I need help. I don't know how to ask for it, but I need it." Nadine said, "Tell me where you are." She was there in 15 minutes. They sat in the parking garage, both of them, and Dot told her, not all of it, not the debt figures, not the full scope of the house, but enough. The buying, the accumulation, the debt, the house she couldn't have people in, the way she had been living for the last 7 years. Nadine listened without flinching, and without the expression Dot had been dreading, not pity, not alarm, not the specific look of someone recalibrating what they thought they knew about you, just presence. The same presence she had offered in a college dormitory 25 years ago, when Dot's father had called to tell her that being excellent was not the same as being good enough. "Okay," Nadine said, "we're going to figure this out, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you won't disappear again." She looked at her. 3 years, Dot. I called, I texted, I drove to your house twice, and you didn't answer." Dot looked at her hands. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for a promise." "I promise," Dot said. Nadine nodded once, the nod of a woman taking a promise seriously. "Then let's start." Nadine Prescott, social worker, was a member of Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church on Claremont Road. Dot knew this, had known it for years, had attended twice at Nadine's invitation, a Christmas service and a spring baptism, and had found the church warm and genuine, and had not returned, because returning required continuity, and continuity required being known over time, and being known over time required letting people see her. What Dot did not know was that Nadine had been bringing her name to Bethel's Friday evening prayer group for 2 years. Not her debt, not the house. Nadine was not a woman who shared another person's private pain without permission. She had simply said, when the group asked for prayer requests, that she had a dear friend who was carrying something heavy and needed the kind of help that comes from above. 2 years of that. Dot would find out later, in the way that you find out about things that were being done on your behalf without your knowledge, and the finding out would undo her in the best possible way. The next morning, Saturday, Nadine picked Dot up for Sabbath service at Bethel. Dot almost canceled. She had decided 4 times between midnight and 7 a.m. to call Nadine and say she wasn't feeling well, which was technically true in every way that mattered. She did not call. She got dressed, slowly, with the specific effort of someone for whom the ordinary tasks of presentation had become complicated by the weight of everything else. And she got in Nadine's car and she went. The pastor of Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church was named Jerome Battle, and he was the kind of man whose name sounded like something he had grown into. There was a quality about him of someone who had fought things and arrived at the other side of them still standing, not unscathed, but standing. He was 58, tall, with a deliberate way of moving and speaking that communicated that nothing in his presence was going to be rushed. He had been at Bethel for 20 years. He preached from notes, but rarely looked at them, as if the sermon lived in him rather than on the paper. He was preaching that morning from Psalm 147. He read verse 3, "The way you read something you have returned to so many times, it has worn grooves." He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. I want you to notice something about this verse, he said. It does not say he heals the people who have it together. It does not say he heals the ones who asked for help in time, or who kept up their devotions, or who came to church every Sabbath without a gap. He paused. It says, brokenhearted. If your heart is broken, if you are in this room right now with a broken heart, under any circumstances, for any reason, this verse is addressed directly to you. It has your name on it. Dot sat in the 4th row beside Nadine and stared at the front of the church with the very still expression of someone who has just been found. Not found in a triumphant way. Found in the way of someone who has been lost for a long time and has just heard their name called in the dark. Relief and exposure arriving simultaneously, undeniable and overwhelming. She did not cry in the service. She cried in the car afterward for 20 minutes while Nadine sat beside her and said nothing because nothing was what was needed. When the crying was finished, Dot said, "I need to fix the house." Nadine said, "I know. I need to fix the money. I know. I don't know how to do either of those things." "I know," Nadine said, "but I do, and I'm not going anywhere." Pastor Battle made a house visit the following Thursday. Dot had agreed to this, barely, with the specific agony of someone consenting to something that requires more courage than they feel they currently have. Nadine had asked her, gently, if it would be okay, and Dot had said yes before she could say no, because the promise she had made in the parking garage was still in her hands, and she was not going to put it down. He arrived at the house on Delwood Avenue with Nadine, and with a woman from Bethel named Sister Carolyn, who ran the church's community outreach ministry and had, over 20 years, seen a great many things without judgment. The 3 of them stood at the front door while Dot unlocked it. She turned before she opened it. She looked at them. "It's bad," she said. "I need you to know it's bad." Pastor Battle said, "We're not here to evaluate. We're here to help." She opened the door. The pathway to the kitchen. The stacks and the towers and the boxes and the bags. 20 years of accumulation organized by the logic of a mind that could not let go of anything, arranged with the internal consistency of a system that made sense only from inside it. Clothing with tags still attached from purchases she had no memory of making. Multiples, 5 coffee makers, 3 identical sets of sheets still in plastic. Enough candles to light a small city. Boxes from online orders that had never been opened, stacked against walls floor to ceiling in the 2nd bedroom, the 3rd bedroom, the living room that had not been sat in for 4 years. Sister Carolyn made a sound and then composed herself. Nadine was very still. Pastor Battle looked at it all. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Dot, who was standing in the narrow pathway with her arms crossed and her chin up with the pride of a woman preparing for a verdict. He said, "How long have you been carrying this by yourself?" Not, "How did you let it get this far?" Not, "Do you understand how serious this is?" Not the assessment she had been bracing for. How long have you been carrying this by yourself? Dot's chin came down. A long time, she said. You don't have to carry it by yourself anymore, he said. That's all I want to say right now. The rest we can figure out. But that part, that ends today. The clearing of the house on Delwood Avenue took 11 Saturdays. Not every Sabbath. They kept the morning services because Dot had discovered that the morning service was now the thing that made the rest of the week possible, but the afternoons. After the service, after the shared meal in the fellowship hall, a rotating group of volunteers from Bethel would arrive at Delwood Avenue in their old clothes with their boxes and their energy and their complete absence of commentary. They sorted and donated and discarded and cleaned. They found the kitchen table. They found the floor of the second bedroom. They found, in the garage, a bicycle that had belonged to a person who used to ride it on Sunday mornings in a version of Dot's life that felt like it had happened to someone else. They found, in a box in the back of the third bedroom, a box sealed with tape and marked in Dot's handwriting, "Do not open." Photographs, her parents, her wedding. Years of her life preserved in images in a sealed box in a buried room, kept but not looked at, held onto with the same logic as everything else, unable to be discarded because they were evidence that those things had existed, that she had existed in them, that the losses were real. Sister Carolyn found her sitting on the floor of the third bedroom with the photographs in her lap. She sat down beside her without a word. They sat there together on the clear floor of a room that was beginning to breathe. And Dot looked at the photographs and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt the grief directly, not managed, not buried under a layer of acquisition, not deferred to 3 a.m. with a purchase. The grief itself, for her father and the approval that never came in quite the right form, for her mother and the 8 years and the silence after, for Gregory and the 6 years of shrinking, for the woman she had been before any of it, standing in the first photograph in the box, 18 years old, leaving Macon, looking directly at the camera with an expression of terrified, genuine hope. She let the grief come all the way through. Sister Carolyn held her hand through the whole of it. The debt required a different kind of clearing. She had told Pastor Battle the full number, $94,000, on the second Thursday visit because she had decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it completely, without the architecture of partial disclosure she had maintained for years. He had listened without reacting to the number, which was either pastoral discipline or the result of 20 years of ministry having calibrated his capacity for unflinching reception, probably both. He referred her to a financial counselor through the church, a member named Howard, a retired banker who did pro bono financial counseling for people in Bethel's community. Howard was 64, matter of fact, and treated the $94,000 the same way Dr. Valeria Reyes treated a difficult scan, as data, not verdict. He built a plan, consolidation, a debt management program, a budget that was realistic rather than aspirational. He projected 4 to 6 years to full resolution with consistent execution. Dot looked at the projection and thought about 4 to 6 years and felt the weight of it. Howard said, "You didn't build this in a day. You're not going to clear it in a day. What matters is that you start." She started. But the twist, the thing that nobody, including Dot, had anticipated, came 3 months into the process. Bethel, Seventh-day Adventist Church, had a legacy fund, a small endowment left by a former member 15 years ago, designated for members of the Bethel community in situations of demonstrated need and demonstrated commitment to restoration. The fund was not widely publicized. It was administered by a small committee that included Pastor Battle. The committee made a decision. They called Dot in on a Tuesday evening after her new Tuesday night small group. She had joined it 6 weeks earlier. The first time in years, she had been regularly in a room with people who knew her circumstances and liked her anyway. Pastor Battle said, "We have been watching you work. For 3 months, you have shown up. To the house clearings, to the small group, to the financial counseling, to the Sabbath services. You have not run. And the committee has voted to make a contribution to your debt reduction from the legacy fund." He slid a paper across the table. The amount was $22,000. Dot looked at the paper. She looked at Pastor Battle. She looked at the members of the committee. Sister Carolyn, Howard, the financial counselor, 2 other faces she recognized from the clearing Saturdays. "I haven't been a member long enough to," she started. "The designation says community," Pastor Battle said. "You are part of this community. That decision was made the moment Nadine said your name in a prayer group 2 years ago." He folded his hands. "This isn't charity, Dot. This is the church being the church. This is what we're for." She pressed both hands flat on the table. She thought about Psalm 147:3. "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." She thought about binding, the specific image of a wound being wrapped, treated, tended, not healed in an instant, bound, cared for, addressed with the patience and consistency of someone who intends to see it through. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was the voice of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been told, credibly and specifically, that they do not have to carry it alone. "Thank Nadine," Sister Carolyn said. "She started praying for you before you knew you needed it." On the 11th and final clearing Saturday, the last room was the garage. Dot had been avoiding it. She knew what was in it, or rather, she knew that she didn't know what was in it, that it contained the years she could least account for, the height of the accumulation, the period when the buying had been at its most feverish and unmanaged. 6. Bethel volunteers arrived at 8 in the morning. Nadine was there. Sister Carolyn was there. Bernard, a newer member who had become, in the way that people do when they show up consistently, a familiar face in Dot's rebuilding season, was there with his truck. They raised the garage door. It took 4 hours. When it was done, when the truck had made 2 runs to the donation center and the garbage had been collected and the actual floor of the garage had been discovered and swept, Dot stood in the empty space and looked at it. She had not seen this floor in 4 years. It was just a garage floor, concrete, slightly stained, entirely ordinary. But she stood on it and looked at the empty walls and the empty shelves and the actual dimensions of the space she had not had access to, space that had been filled and blocked and buried, and felt something she could not immediately name. Pastor Battle, who had arrived at noon and stayed for the final hours, said, "What do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "I feel like I can breathe," she said, "like the house can breathe." "That's what repentance does," he said. Not the religious word for it, the actual thing, the turning, the clearing, the making of space for something different. He looked at the empty garage. This is what the inside of a changed life looks like at the beginning, empty and a little cold and full of possibility. She looked at the empty space. She thought about the 18-year-old in the photograph, leaving Macon with terrified hope. She thought about everything between then and now. She thought, there is still time. 8 months after the first Sabbath service at Bethel, 9 months after the parking garage call, 11 clearing Saturdays, 6 months of Tuesday small group, 4 months of Howard's budget plan, reducing the debt with the methodical consistency of someone who has accepted that slow progress is still progress. Dot Wynn did something she had not done in 23 years. She had people over for dinner. Not many. 7. Nadine and her husband, Sister Carolyn, Howard and his wife, Bernard, Pastor Battle. She cooked, actually cooked, at the kitchen table that had been found and cleared and restored and was now in regular use, a full spread, the kind her mother used to make on Sunday afternoons in Macon. Collard greens and cornbread and baked chicken and sweet potato pie, because some things are love expressed through a kitchen. They sat around the table, all 7 of them, and the sound of the house on Delwood Avenue was, for the first time in longer than Dot could reliably remember, the sound of people inside it, laughter and conversation, and the particular warmth of a room that is being used for the thing it was built for. After dinner, Nadine asked if she could say something. She stood up. She said, 2 years ago, I started praying for Dot without knowing exactly what I was praying for. I knew she was lost. I didn't know how to reach her, so I just kept saying her name and trusting that God knew the address. She looked at Dot. He knew the address. Dot looked around the table. At the cleared room, the clean surface, the faces of people who had shown up with their Saturday afternoons and their truck beds and their patient, persistent presence, and had helped her unbury herself. She thought about the sealed box in the 3rd bedroom and the photographs and the grief that had finally come all the way through. She thought about 94,000 becoming 72,000 becoming, in time, in the deliberate, unromantic work of a budget followed consistently, something manageable, something with an end. She thought about a verse that had been read in a church on a Saturday morning when she was sitting in the 4th row bracing for a verdict and receiving instead an invitation. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. She had been brokenhearted. She was being healed, not instantly, not without cost or effort, or the specific discomfort of being seen accurately by people who chose to stay anyway, but genuinely, tangibly, in ways she could point to. The cleared rooms, the reduced debt, the table full of people, the fact that she had slept through the night for the first time in years and woken up to a house she could walk through without navigating around the architecture of her own pain. She stood up. She said, I want to pray. I haven't prayed out loud in a room with people since I was a girl in my father's house. She paused. But I think it's time. She prayed. She thanked God for Nadine, who said her name in the dark, for Sister Carolyn, who sat on the floor and held her hand, for Howard, who treated the $94,000 like data, for Pastor Battle, who asked how long she had been carrying it alone instead of asking how she had let it get this far, for the volunteers who showed up on Saturdays, for the legacy fund and the person 15 years ago who had no idea who they were funding. And she thanked God for the garage floor, for the ordinary, concrete, slightly stained, entirely unglamorous garage floor that she had not seen in 4 years. And that meant, in the way that cleared spaces always mean something more than their square footage, that there was room now, room for something new, room to be found, room to breathe. She said amen. And around the table, 7 voices said it with her. The house on Delwood Avenue looks different now. The gutters are fixed. The curtains are open. The front porch holds a rocking chair and a plant that Dot tends with the careful attention of someone who has learned, late but genuinely, the patience required to keep something living. The garage is empty of everything that was in it. It is now used for what garages are for. The debt, as of today, is at $61,000 heading in one direction. Dot Wynn is 48 years old. a registered nurse, a member of Bethel's Seventh-day Adventist Church, a woman who has dinner guests on a regular basis, and someone who has started carefully in the way you start things that matter to talk to other women in the Tuesday small group who are carrying things they have not yet been able to put down. She doesn't tell them what to do. She doesn't have a program or a method or a prescription. She just tells them what someone told her on a Thursday morning in a buried house. How long have you been carrying this by yourself? And she waits for the answer, and she stays. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified about more inspirational stories on redemption and hope.